There's a moment that happens to almost everyone, usually sometime in the middle of an ordinary day. You're sitting somewhere, maybe at your desk, maybe in a cafe, and for a split second, nothing is demanding your attention. No notification, no task waiting, just a small gap in the noise. And almost immediately, before you've even registered it consciously, your hand reaches for your phone. It happens so fast you barely notice. But something in you noticed the space, and something in you couldn't let it stay. We live in a world that has quietly declared war on emptiness. Every moment gets filled. Every pause gets patched. The silence between one thing and the next becomes an opening to be plugged. And we've gotten so good at this, so practiced at it, that we've forgotten what that space was ever for. We don't ask ourselves why we fill it. We just do. Like breathing, like reflex. But here's the strange part. The more we fill, the less satisfied we feel. The more content we consume, the more restless we become. The more we talk, the less we actually connect. Something doesn't add up, and most of us sense it, we just can't put our finger on what's missing. There's a Japanese concept that might be the closest thing to an answer. It's called ma. And the reason it doesn't translate easily into English isn't because the idea is complicated. It's because English doesn't have a word for it. Ma is the space between things, the pause between two notes, the silence after a sentence ends but before the next one begins, the distance between two people sitting together. It isn't absence. It's the space that makes presence possible. In traditional Japanese architecture, ma was never accidental. When a craftsman designed a doorway, the width wasn't just functional. It shaped the experience of crossing it. When a garden was laid out, the empty gravel wasn't a backdrop for the rocks. The gravel was the point. The emptiness had weight. The silence had shape. And the people who built these spaces understood something that took centuries to reach the rest of the world. That what you leave out can carry more meaning than what you put in. Think about music for a moment. Not any particular song, just the experience of hearing something that moves you. It almost never moves you because of the notes alone. It moves you because of the space around them. The beat before the chorus drops. The rest after a long phrase. The note that hangs in the air longer than you expected. Remove those pauses and you don't just lose the drama, you lose the meaning. The notes need somewhere to land. The same is true of conversation. You've probably had the experience of talking with someone who really listens, not just waiting for their turn to speak, but actually sitting with what you said. There's a quality to that silence. It isn't awkward. It isn't empty. It's full of something that words couldn't carry. And it makes you feel more heard than any quick response could. That space between your words and theirs, that's ma. And most of us have forgotten how to hold it. Modern productivity culture has taught us that empty time is wasted time. An unscheduled hour is a failure of planning. Silence in a conversation is a social error. A clear desk is fine, but a clear mind, that's practically suspicious. We've internalized a version of efficiency that treats any gap as a problem to be solved, any pause as a lag to be reduced. We optimize ourselves the way we optimize software. Latency is the enemy. Downtime is the enemy. Stillness is the enemy. But the mind doesn't work like software. It doesn't perform better under constant load. It performs better when it's allowed to wander, when it has space to make the connections that don't happen when you're staring at a screen trying to force an insight. Almost every major creative realization in history didn't happen at a desk. It happened in a bath, on a walk, in the strange half-consciousness before sleep. The mind solves problems sideways. It needs the gap to do it. Research in cognitive psychology has been quietly building a case for this for decades. When you let your mind rest, not sleep, but genuinely rest, undirected, what activates isn't nothing. What activates is a network of brain regions associated with reflection, memory integration, empathy, and imagination. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, but you could just as easily call it the part of you that needs a quiet room to work. When we never give it that room, we slowly start to lose access to it. And then we wonder why we feel flat, why nothing seems to land the way it used to. There's a harder version of this too, the one that's more personal and harder to look at directly. When we fill every moment, we're not just being productive. We're often avoiding something, the discomfort of uncertainty, the quiet weight of an unresolved feeling. the question that starts forming when the noise stops. Stillness doesn't just allow clarity. It demands it. And for a lot of people, that's precisely why it's uncomfortable. The space doesn't scare us because it's empty. It scares us because of what might be in it. But here's what the Zen tradition and increasingly modern psychology keeps pointing back to: the discomfort of the space is usually smaller than what you imagine. Most people who sit with real stillness for the first time report something unexpected. Not dread, not chaos, just a kind of settling. Like the water in a shaken glass going still. The thoughts slow down. The noise inside follows the noise outside. And what's left isn't emptiness. It's something that feels, quietly, like yourself. The poet Rilke wrote about learning to love the questions. Not to demand answers, not to rush through the uncomfortable parts, but to live the questions, to stay in the space where meaning hasn't resolved yet. That is Ma, not the answer, not even the search, the willingness to let the space be there. What would it actually mean to practice this? Not in a dramatic way. Nothing that requires a retreat or a philosophy or a radical restructuring of your schedule. Just small experiments. You wake up in the morning and instead of reaching for your phone, you sit for 2 minutes. Not meditating, just sitting. Letting the day begin at its own pace rather than at the pace of whoever sent the last notification. Or you let a conversation end without immediately filling the silence. Or you eat lunch without a screen. Or you take a walk with no audio in your ears and let your mind go wherever it wants. These things sound simple. They are simple. But they're also quietly countercultural in a way that can feel strange at first. Because the reflex to fill is strong. And the world around you is designed, quite deliberately, to reinforce that reflex. Every platform, every interface, every notification is engineered to make sure that gap never stays empty long enough for you to notice it was there. So the practice is partly an act of noticing. Catching yourself at the moment your hand moves toward your phone and asking very gently what you're moving away from. Not to stop yourself necessarily, just to know. Because knowing gives you a choice. And the choice, over time, in small increments, is where something shifts. The Japanese tea ceremony takes about 4 hours to complete. Every motion in it is slower than it needs to be if the goal is just tea. The water is poured with care. The bowl is turned with attention. The silence between gestures is held like something precious. And the point is not efficiency. The point is to be so fully in the moment that the gap between yourself and the experience disappears. That's not a luxury reserved for tea masters in Kyoto. That's something that lives in any 2 minutes of your morning that you don't immediately fill. Ma isn't a philosophy you adopt. It isn't an aesthetic you cultivate. It's a capacity you already have, one that gets buried under everything you pile on top of it. And the strange thing is, you already know what it feels like. You felt it. In that moment before you reached for the phone, when the silence was there and you hadn't yet disturbed it. Something in you recognized it. Something in you, for just a second, didn't want it to go.